Here is everything we are told about the Great Pyramid. 100,000 workers, copper chisels, papyrus ropes, 20 years. That is the postcard version, the one you learn at 10 and never question at 50. Now, grab a calculator. 2.3 million blocks in 20 years. That is 315,000 blocks a year. 863 blocks a day. One block every 4.5 minutes, around the clock. No weekends, no flooding season, no downtime, for 20 years straight. And every single one of those blocks had to be quarried, shaped, transported across the plateau, and placed with joints tighter than a credit card. How does a civilization that documented every grain shipment, every worker's ration, every temple dedication, how does that civilization leave zero records of the largest construction project in human history? Not one hieroglyph, not one supply ledger, not one architect's name, not one complaint from a foreman. Nothing. The postcard version has a problem, and the problem is arithmetic. How was this pyramid really built, and why does the math refuse to work? Let us start with the ramp. The most popular explanation for how the blocks reached the top is a straight ramp. Simple, elegant, and physically absurd. A ramp at a workable angle of 5 degrees from the base to the summit would need to stretch 1.6 kilometers across the Giza plateau. Its volume of material would exceed the volume of the pyramid itself. You would need a second construction project, larger than the first, just to build the access road. And then you would need to dismantle it afterward because geological surveys of the surrounding bedrock show no foundation cuts, no compacted fill, no remnant material consistent with the structure of that scale. The ramp is not missing because it was removed. It is missing because it was never there. A spiral ramp wrapping around the pyramid solves the length problem, but creates another one entirely. Blocks weighing 2.5 tons cannot turn 90-degree corners on a narrow stone ramp without modern heavy machinery. The geometry does not permit it. The turning radius alone would require the ramp to be wider than the face of the pyramid at its upper courses, which defeats the entire purpose of building inward. Jean-Pierre Houdin, a French architect, proposed the most sophisticated alternative in 2006, an internal ramp, a corkscrew passage hidden inside the structure itself. Houdin's model is elegant. It accounts for the logistics of upper course construction without requiring any external structure. It is the most promising theory to date, but it has never been verified. No scan has confirmed it. No drill has tested it. No physical evidence of internal ramps has ever been detected. A ramp that cannot be measured is not a ramp. It is a hypothesis dressed up as an answer. Let the arithmetic speak for itself. Even under the most generous assumptions, a perfectly organized workforce of 100,000 laborers working 12-hour shifts with 0 accidents, 0 delays, and 0 logistical bottlenecks, the rate required is 1 block quarried, transported, lifted, and placed every 270 seconds. For 2 decades. Without a single management system, supply chain, or engineering blueprint that survives in the record. The math does not add up. Period. Run the equation on any modern logistics model. Input the block weight, distance, vertical lift, and 20-year deadline, and the output is the same. Not feasible. 3 ramp theories, 3 failures. And mainstream archaeology has been selling the official version for over a century, confidently, repeatedly, in every textbook and television special, without ever solving the foundational equation that breaks it. 20 years. 100,000 workers. And the best answer is still a PowerPoint slide with a picture of a ramp. That is like writing a symphony and crediting a kazoo. Now, follow the measurements, because precision is where the postcard version goes completely silent. The base of the Great Pyramid is aligned to true north within 3 arc minutes. That is 0.05 degrees. To put that in perspective, a standard magnetic compass today is accurate to about 1 degree. The ancient builders were 20 times more precise. Without a compass, without a theodolite, without any optical instrument that has ever been recovered from the 4th Dynasty archaeological record. The 4 sides of the base differ in length by a maximum of 4.4 centimeters, over 230 meters per side. That is a tolerance of 0.019%. Modern high-rise construction projects of comparable footprint routinely exceed this margin of error. The joints between the original casing stones, the outer layer of polished white limestone, most of it stripped away by medieval Cairenes for use in mosques and fortifications, measure 0.5 millimeters, half a millimeter, over an area of 13 acres. Published research from Sir William Matthew Flinders Petrie's landmark 1883 survey, the first rigorous measurement of the pyramid using triangulation, calibrated steel tapes, and precision optical instruments, established these figures. Later verification came from teams within the Egyptian Antiquities Organization and from independent engineering assessments conducted throughout the 20th century. The data is not disputed by anyone. What is disputed is how. Because no surveying instrument recovered from the Old Kingdom can produce these results. No bronze tool, no sighting rod. No plumb line achieves 0.05 degrees of alignment across 230 meters of desert bedrock that itself is not perfectly level. The Giza Plateau has a natural elevation variation of several centimeters across the pyramid's footprint. The builders did not simply align a structure to cardinal north. They compensated for terrain irregularities across a 13-acre base and still achieved a tolerance of 0.019%. That demands, at minimum, optical-grade precision leveling instruments, tools capable of detecting angular deviations smaller than the naked eye can perceive. Documented evidence confirms they had none of these. And nobody, in over a century of Egyptology, has offered a workable, testable explanation for how it was done. The precision is a fact. The method is a blank page. And the postcard version does not have a chapter for blank pages. Off by a margin of about 4,000 years. Now, the granite. This is where mainstream archaeology refuses to look too closely. The King's Chamber sits 60 meters above ground level, buried deep inside the pyramid's limestone core. Above it, 5 so-called relieving chambers, stacked one on top of another. Their stated purpose is to redistribute the colossal weight of the stone above and prevent the chamber ceiling from collapsing inward. 9 granite slabs form the ceiling of the King's Chamber alone. Each slab weighs between 25 and 80 tons. The granite was quarried in Aswan, 800 kilometers to the south, upstream on the Nile. 800 kilometers. Down by barge during the annual inundation, then hauled overland to the base of the plateau. At least, that is the best guess. But no modern reconstruction has demonstrated transporting a block of this weight over this distance using 4th Dynasty tools. The heaviest block moved in an experimental archaeology project was 2.5 tons, using modern ropes engineered tracks, and industrial lubricants. The granite slabs above the king's chamber weigh 30 times that. 30 times, using ropes and goodwill. And then they were lifted, 60 meters straight up, through a partially completed stone structure with internal corridors barely wide enough for workers to pass in single file. Fitted into position with a precision that a research team at the University of Leeds measured at less than the width of a thumbnail deviation over 5 meters of surface. The interior walls of the king's chamber deviate by less than 1 millimeter across their entire span. Let us look at the numbers. Granite has a Mohs hardness of 6 to 7. Copper, the hardest metal tool material available to 4th Dynasty builders, maxes out at 3 on the same scale. You cannot cut granite with copper. You can abrade it slowly, using quartz sand as a grinding medium, and enormous investments of time and labor. But the 20-year construction window does not allow for slow, and the official explanation for lifting 80-ton granite slabs 60 meters into the air and fitting them to sub-millimeter tolerances? Ropes, wooden levers, and the determination of thousands of workers. No experiment has ever replicated this at scale. Not once. Not at this weight. Not at this height. Not by any team, anywhere, at any point in the history of experimental archaeology. Ropes and wooden levers for 80 tons at 60 meters. Your furniture movers would quit on day 1. Mark Lehner's AERA project at Giza, the most comprehensive attempt to model pyramid construction, used modern tools to build a miniature pyramid of small blocks. It demonstrated how 1 to 2 ton blocks could be managed, but it never attempted 80 tons or 60 meters of vertical lift. Nobody at AERA has claimed it proves the full-scale version is achievable. The math kills the story. And here is where it gets uncomfortable. Go inside the pyramid. Walk down the descending passage, a corridor barely a meter wide and a meter high, angled at 26 degrees into the bedrock beneath the structure. Feel the weight of 6 million tons of stone pressing down above you. Enter the Grand Gallery, that astonishing space 7 meters high, with its corbelled walls narrowing toward the ceiling in 7 precisely graduated limestone courses. Pass through the antechamber into the king's chamber. Continue into the queen's chamber, the horizontal passages, the narrow shafts that angle upward through the body of the pyramid toward the exterior. Thousands upon thousands of hours of labor were spent deep inside these spaces, carving, polishing, fitting limestone and granite blocks to sub-millimeter precision in conditions of absolute darkness. No windows. No openings to the exterior that could have admitted daylight to the working areas deep within the core. Every ancient light source known to archaeology, torches, oil lamps, tallow candles, burning animal fat, dried papyrus reeds, produces soot. Soot is carbon particulate. Carbon adheres to porous limestone permanently. It bonds to the stone surface at a molecular level and cannot be removed without visibly abrading or damaging the underlying material. Any forensic scientist will tell you the same thing. A controlled combustion test on porous limestone produces measurable carbon residue within 48 hours, permanent, irreversible, detectable at trace levels. This part usually gets skipped. The interior of the Great Pyramid, every passage, every gallery, every chamber that has been examined by modern researchers, has 0 traces of soot. None. Not on the ceiling of the Grand Gallery, where rising smoke would have deposited residue over years of continuous work. Not in the descending passage, Not in the Queen's chamber, not anywhere. According to peer-reviewed findings from researchers who have directly examined the interior limestone surfaces, including teams using UV fluorescence and chemical analysis to detect trace combustion residue, there is nothing. No soot, no carbon deposits, no evidence of fire of any kind. A civilization that supposedly spent 2 decades constructing the interior of a sealed stone structure in complete darkness left no evidence of ever using a flame. 20 years in the dark. Sound workable to you? So either they carved and polished and fitted millions of tons of stone entirely by touch, in pitch blackness, for 20 years, or they possessed a light source that does not produce soot. The equation has no solution, not within any existing explanation. And mirrors do not work. Sunlight cannot be bounced around multiple corners and down-angled passages deep inside 6 million tons of stone. Polished copper mirrors, the best reflective surface available, lose significant intensity with each reflection. After 2 or 3 bounces, the light reaching the working face would be indistinguishable from darkness. The Grand Gallery alone is 47 meters long and required years of continuous stonework deep inside the pyramid's body. Workers carried tools, hauled finishing stones, polished surfaces to sub-millimeter flatness, all in conditions where a single torch would have contaminated every surface within meters. The absence of soot is not a detail. It is an impossible condition, unless the tools and methods were fundamentally different from anything in the official record. 80 tons divided by 0 light sources. The textbooks skip this part entirely. Now the only piece of evidence that ties the pyramid to a specific pharaoh. This is the part that should trouble everyone who repeats the name Khufu with confidence. The entire attribution, the Great Pyramid of Khufu, the only surviving wonder of the ancient world, the most famous structure ever built by human hands, rests on a single discovery. In 1837, Colonel Richard William Howard Vyse, a British military officer turned amateur Egyptologist, was running out of time and funding at Giza. His expedition had produced no significant finds. His investors and the British public were demanding results. He used gunpowder, actual explosives, to blast his way into the relieving chambers above the king's chamber, spaces no human had entered since the 4th dynasty. Inside one of those rough, unfinished chambers, on a surface never meant to be seen, he found red ochre markings that included what appeared to be the royal cartouche of Pharaoh Khufu. That is it. One name, in one chamber, found by one man under intense pressure to produce a headline. The scholarly consensus on this has never fully settled. Samuel Birch, the British Museum's leading Egyptologist at the time, examined the markings shortly after Vyse's announcement. He noted significant irregularities in the hieratic script, forms and orientations that did not match established 4th dynasty writing conventions. An alternative hypothesis, put forward by independent researchers including Sitchin and later by Scott Creighton using Vyse's own journal entries, argues the cartouche was painted by Vyse's team to secure continued funding and public attention. Records show that Vyse's associate, a man named John Raven Hill, had access to the chambers before independent witnesses were admitted. But the broader point does not hinge on whether Vyse personally forged the cartouche. The broader point is structural. The largest building on the Giza Plateau, 6.5 million tons of stone, the single most massive construction project of the ancient world, is attributed to one pharaoh on the basis of one painted name in one hidden chamber discovered by one man who needed a result. No other inscription anywhere inside the pyramid mentions Khufu. No construction record, No dedication text, no architect's name, no worker's graffiti. When you compare this side by side with every other major Egyptian royal structure, the temples at Karnak covered in thousands of hieroglyphic panels, the tombs in the Valley of the Kings with their elaborate painted walls, the monuments at Abu Simbel, even the smaller pyramids at Saqqara and Dashur with their inscribed internal texts, every one carries extensive identification of its builder, its purpose, its divine patron. The Great Pyramid carries nothing. A civilization that carved its pharaohs' names into everything: obelisks, temples, tombs, quarry walls, even pottery shards and wooden inventory tags, left the largest structure on Earth unsigned. The silence is deafening. Every other monument screams its name. This one, the biggest of them all, says nothing. But the pyramid is not done talking. In 2017, an international research team from Japan, France, and Egypt published a paper in the journal Nature. The ScanPyramids project, led by Mehdi Tayoubi of the Heritage Innovation Preservation Institute in Paris and Kunihiro Morishima of Nagoya University, used muon tomography to see through 6 million tons of stone without drilling a single hole. Muons are subatomic particles generated when cosmic rays strike molecules in the upper atmosphere. They rain down on the Earth's surface continuously, passing through solid matter, but denser material absorbs more of them, creating shadows in the particle flux. By placing 3 different types of detectors at strategic points inside and around the pyramid, and measuring muon arrival rates from different angles over many months, the team constructed a 3-dimensional density map of the pyramid's interior with a resolution sufficient to detect voids larger than a few meters. And they found something that changed everything: a cavity above the Grand Gallery. At least 30 meters long, a space roughly the size of a commercial passenger airliner, hidden inside the most studied structure on Earth for 45 centuries. The team confirmed the finding with 3 independent detection technologies: nuclear emulsion plates, scintillator hodoscopes, and gas detectors positioned at different locations. All 3 methods agreed. The big void is real. Published in Nature, peer-reviewed by the international physics and archaeology communities, confirmed by multiple independent measurement campaigns. I pulled on that thread. Here is what nobody mentions. In 2023, the same ScanPyramids project announced a second discovery, a previously unknown corridor near the northern face of the pyramid, 9 meters long, with a gabled ceiling formed by massive chevron-shaped limestone blocks. They inserted a tiny endoscope through a narrow gap between stones. The footage showed pristine walls, clean surfaces, dust on the floor undisturbed. Not a single footprint, not a single disturbance. A space no human had entered in 45 centuries. The air inside had been sealed since the reign of the pharaohs. The corridor proved to be accessible, but the big void is not. Reaching it would require drilling through meters of solid limestone, a procedure that is technically straightforward. We have the technology to do this without damaging the structure. Techniques used routinely in structural engineering assessments and geological core sampling can penetrate stone with millimeter precision and 0 collateral damage. We have known about the void since 2017. The discovery has been in Nature for 8 years. And here is the fact that no documentary likes to linger on. There is no approved plan to access the 30-meter void. No drilling application has been filed. No endoscope timeline exists. No investigation of any kind has been scheduled. The most significant internal discovery in the Great Pyramid since Howard Weiss blasted his way in with gunpowder 186 years ago, and the official response is silence. Not denial, not objection, not even a timeline for future consideration. Silence. The Egyptian Supreme Council of Antiquities has not issued a statement. No international consortium has been formed. No funding proposal has been submitted to access the void. In the same period, we sent a rover to Mars and built a super collider under the Swiss Alps. But a stone chamber in Egypt, measured, confirmed, published, remains sealed. That is not science. That is a decision not to look. There is a question that lives underneath all of these numbers. It is not about blocks or ramps or cartouches. It is about what we are willing to know. We mapped the chemical composition of a star 400 light-years away using spectroscopy before we looked inside a stone chamber standing 40 minutes from downtown Cairo. We have instruments that can detect a gravitational wave generated by two black holes colliding 1 billion years ago, a ripple in space-time thinner than a proton. But we will not drill a hole in limestone. That is not a failure of technology. That is a choice. And choices have reasons. Perhaps the postcard version is too valuable to risk. Perhaps certainty, even false certainty, is more comfortable than whatever is waiting behind those stones. Perhaps some doors are left closed not because we cannot open them, but because opening them would mean closing the books we have already written. And perhaps this is the oldest pattern of all. Every civilization reaches a point where preserving its story matters more than testing it. We have been here before. We will be here again. The question is not whether the pyramid holds answers. The question is whether we are willing to let those answers rewrite the ones we already have. 1 block every 4.5 minutes. A ramp that physics will not permit. Precision that embarrasses modern survey instruments. Darkness without fire. A name painted by a man who needed funding. A 30-meter void confirmed by 3 independent detection methods. Sealed. Still sealed. The math does not work. No ramp, no inscriptions. But precision is not limited to Giza. 2,000 years ago, the Romans held a gradient of 0.24 millimeters per meter, over 50 kilometers. Without a laser, 7 bridges, 7 impossible numbers.